The rusted padlock crumbled in Jake Sullivan's weathered hands as he stood before the abandoned workshop in rural Pennsylvania. What should have been a simple renovation job had just become the most dangerous discovery of his life. His German shepherd, Rex, wouldn't stop digging beneath the concrete floor, and when Jake finally broke through, he found himself staring into a perfectly preserved Nazi vault filled with stolen gold, priceless artwork, and something far more sinister: documents that could rewrite World War II history. But Jake wasn't just any construction worker. 20 years ago, he'd been Captain Sullivan, Army intelligence, specialized in recovering looted Nazi treasure. Now, as black SUVs circled his property and his phone buzzed with threatening calls, Jake realized someone knew exactly who he was and what he'd found. The vault contained enough wealth to change his life forever, but the secrets inside could get him killed before sunrise. How do you protect a $100 million discovery when half the world wants you dead and the other half wants you disappeared? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 hours earlier, Jake had been thinking about coffee and whether he could afford new shingles for his own roof. The workshop purchase had been an impulse buy at a county auction: 37 acres of overgrown farmland and a crumbling building that the auctioneer could barely give away. Jake's winning bid of $8,000 had been met with sympathetic chuckles from other bidders, who clearly thought he'd lost his mind. Rex had started acting strange the moment they'd arrived that morning. The usually obedient dog had ignored Jake's calls, instead pawing frantically at a section of concrete near the workshop's northeast corner. The floor there looked newer than the rest, maybe poured in the 1940s if Jake's trained eye was right. After 45 minutes of Rex's persistent whining and digging, Jake had grabbed his sledgehammer. The concrete was thicker than expected, nearly 6 inches, but underneath, instead of dirt or a foundation, his hammer had broken through into empty space. The sound that echoed back made Jake's blood run cold. It was the hollow ring of something much larger than a simple basement. He'd widened the hole carefully, using his flashlight to peer into the darkness below. What he saw defied explanation: a steel-lined chamber, maybe 20 feet square, with walls lined with wooden crates and metal filing cabinets. Everything was pristine, untouched by decades of moisture or decay. Climate-controlled, which meant electricity had been running to this place longer than the property records suggested. The ladder was still there, bolted to the vault's wall. Jake had descended slowly, Rex whimpering above. The first crate he'd opened contained gold bars, each one stamped with an eagle and swastika. The second held paintings wrapped in oiled cloth, originals that Jake recognized from his Army intelligence days as pieces looted from Jewish families across occupied Europe. But it was the filing cabinet that made his hands shake. The documents inside weren't just lists of stolen property or transportation manifests. These were operational orders, signed by officers Jake thought had died at Nuremberg. Plans for something called Operation Lazarus, a post-war network designed to rebuild the Reich from American soil. Names, dates, locations, Swiss bank account numbers, and photographs of men who should have been captured or killed in 1945, standing in what looked like American government buildings sometime in the 1950s. At the bottom of the files, a folder marked Assets. Domestic operatives contained a list that made Jake's mouth go dry. American businessmen, politicians, military officers, people who'd been secretly recruited or blackmailed into serving Nazi interests long after the war ended. Some of the names were still alive. Some held positions of considerable power. That's when his phone had started ringing. The first call came from a blocked number. A woman's voice, slight accent, German, maybe Austrian. "Mr. Sullivan, you found something that doesn't belong to you. We're prepared to offer you $10 million to walk away and forget what you've seen." He'd hung up immediately, but the phone rang again within seconds. Different voice this time, American, with the flat tone of someone who'd made threats for a living. "Captain Sullivan, yes, we know who you are. We know about your work in Bavaria. That expertise makes you dangerous to certain people. Return what you've taken and relocate to the address we're texting you. You have 6 hours. Jake had climbed out of the vault fast, Rex dancing nervously around the hole. Through the grimy workshop windows, he could see them now. 3 black SUVs positioned at intervals along the county road. They weren't trying to hide anymore. His hands moved automatically to his waistband, muscle memory from 2 decades past, but he'd stopped carrying a service weapon when he'd left the army. His truck was parked too far from the workshop, and the nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message with a single line that made his blood freeze. "We have Sarah." Sarah Martinez, his only living relative. His sister lived 300 miles away in Baltimore, worked as a nurse, had no idea about Jake's military past or what he'd discovered today. Rex growled low in his throat, ears pricked toward the road. The SUVs were moving. The morning sun cast long shadows across the workshop's debris-strewn floor as Jake surveyed his purchase with growing unease. What had seemed like a steal at the auction now felt more like a monument to his poor judgment. Rex padded beside him, nose twitching at the musty air thick with decades of neglect. "What do you think, boy? Did your old man bite off more than he can chew?" Jake scratched behind the German shepherd's ears, earning a reassuring thump of tail against his leg. The workshop stretched nearly 40 feet deep, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into cobweb-shrouded darkness. Workbenches lined the walls, their surfaces buried under rusted tools, yellowed newspapers, and what looked like the remnants of elaborate clockwork mechanisms. The previous owner, Heinrich Müller, had been a reclusive watchmaker who'd lived above the shop until his death 6 months ago. Jake picked up a newspaper dated 1987, its headlines proclaiming the fall of the Berlin Wall. Beneath it lay another from 1962, then 1955. It was as if Müller had saved every paper for 40 years, creating archaeological layers of history. Rex suddenly stiffened, his ears pricking forward. A low growl rumbled in his throat. "What is it?" Jake followed the dog's gaze toward the back corner, where shadows pooled deepest. Rex trotted over, sniffing intently at what appeared to be solid wall. His paws scratched at the wooden paneling, and Jake heard something odd, a hollow echo where there should have been none. Kneeling beside his dog, Jake ran his hands along the wall. The wood grain looked identical to the rest of the paneling, but when he pressed against it, the entire section shifted slightly. His pulse quickened. "Good boy," he whispered. "Very good boy." It took 20 minutes to clear enough debris to access the hidden panel properly. Jake found the mechanism almost by accident, a small brass fitting disguised as a decorative element. When twisted, it released a catch, and the panel swung inward on silent hinges. Cool air rushed out, carrying a metallic scent that made Rex whine uneasily. Jake pulled out his phone's flashlight and peered into the darkness beyond. A narrow stone staircase descended into the earth. His rational mind screamed warnings. This was how people died in horror movies, following mysterious staircases into basements that shouldn't exist. But curiosity had always been his weakness, the trait that made him an excellent investigative journalist and a mediocre decision-maker in personal relationships. The stairs were solid, carved from local limestone. Someone had taken great care in their construction, ensuring they would last. At the bottom, Jake's light revealed a small chamber, perhaps 10 feet square, with walls of the same stone. But it was what occupied the center of the room that made his breath catch. A safe. Not just any safe, a massive steel vault that looked like it belonged in a bank, not beneath a small-town watchmaker's shop. Its door stood slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry and forgotten to secure it properly. Rex descended the stairs with reluctant steps, staying close to Jake's side. The dog's unease was palpable, but he didn't retreat. Jake approached the vault slowly. The steel was unmarked by rust despite the underground location, suggesting either superior metallurgy or recent maintenance. When he pulled the heavy door wider, its hinges moved without a sound. Inside, the vault was larger than the exterior suggested, extending back into darkness. Wooden crates lined the walls, each bearing stenciled markings in what looked like German. But it was the item on the central pedestal that commanded Jake's attention. A leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed but perfectly preserved. Jake lifted it carefully, noting its surprising weight. The cover bore an embossed eagle, not just any eagle, but the distinctive Nazi Reichsadler, wings spread wide above a swastika. His hands trembled as he opened to the first page. The text was in German, written in meticulous script, but he recognized enough words to understand. This wasn't a watchmaker's inventory. Names filled the pages, accompanied by numbers, locations, and what appeared to be detailed descriptions of valuable items. A cold realization crept over him. This wasn't just a hidden room, it was a repository, and if the dates he could make out were accurate, it predated Heinrich Muller's ownership of the building by decades. Rex's growl echoed off the stone walls, but this time he wasn't looking at the vault. His attention was fixed on the staircase, ears forward, hackles rising. Jake heard it then, the creak of floorboards overhead. Someone was in the workshop above them, moving with careful, deliberate steps. He closed the ledger and tucked it under his arm, mind racing. The hidden panel. Had he closed it behind them? His phone showed no signal down here, and the single exit led directly toward whoever was searching above. The footsteps stopped directly overhead, as if the intruder had found something of interest. In the silence that followed, Jake could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Rex pressed against his leg, a warm, solid reminder that he wasn't alone. But as the footsteps resumed, moving now with obvious purpose toward the back corner of the workshop, Jake realized they might both be trapped. The heavy steel door groaned as Jake forced it open another foot, his flashlight beam cutting through the musty darkness beyond. Rex whined softly beside him, ears pinned back against his head. The German shepherd had led him here, but now the dog seemed reluctant to enter the space his digging had revealed. Jake squeezed through the gap, his shoulder scraping against the cold metal. The air inside was stale and thick, carrying an odd metallic tang that made his nose wrinkle. His flashlight swept across the chamber, revealing concrete walls and a surprisingly spacious room that extended far beyond what he'd expected from the small opening. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. Wooden crates lined the walls, stacked 3 high in military precision. Each one bore the unmistakable black eagle and swastika of the Third Reich, along with German text he couldn't read. Some crates were smaller, about the size of ammunition boxes, while others were large enough to hold a refrigerator. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs as he approached the nearest stack. His hands shook as he lifted the lid of a smaller crate. Inside, nestled in rotting straw, dozens of gold coins caught his flashlight beam. He picked one up, feeling its substantial weight. The profile of a man in military uniform was etched on one side, surrounded by German text. On the reverse, another eagle clutched a swastika in its talons. Jake set the coin down carefully and moved to another crate. This one contained bundles of what looked like currency. German marks, but also American dollars and British pounds. The bills were old but appeared to be in remarkable condition, protected by the dry, sealed environment. The largest crates drew his attention next. The first one he opened made his stomach lurch. Paintings were stacked inside, separated by cloth wrapping. He recognized the style of one immediately. It looked like something that belonged in a museum. A small placard was still attached to the frame, written in what appeared to be French. "Stolen art," he muttered, the pieces falling into place. He'd seen documentaries about Nazi looting operations during World War II. Billions of dollars worth of cultural treasures had been seized from museums, private collections, and Jewish families across occupied Europe. Rex barked suddenly from outside the vault, a sharp warning that made Jake's blood run cold. He killed his flashlight and listened, straining his ears in the absolute darkness. Footsteps, heavy boots crushing the debris scattered around his workshop floor. "I'm telling you, Thompson, the readings are definitely coming from this direction." A man's voice carried through the walls, American accent, professional tone. 4700 Elm Street, another voice confirmed. Property was purchased 3 days ago by a Jake Sullivan. Construction worker, clean background check. Jake's mind raced. How did they know about this place? He'd only discovered the vault an hour ago. His eyes had adjusted enough to make out the faint rectangle of light from the entrance. Very carefully, he moved toward it. Motion sensors picked up activity in this sector around 1400 hours. The first voice continued. Whatever was buried here, someone found it. Jake pressed himself against the wall beside the vault entrance and peered through the crack. 2 men in dark suits were examining his workshop, one holding what looked like a tablet computer, while the other swept a handheld device back and forth. The device was beeping steadily. Radiation signature is stronger near the back wall, the man with the scanner announced. Radiation. Jake's stomach dropped. Were the contents of the vault dangerous? He thought about the coins he'd handled, the crates he'd opened. How long had he been exposed? There. The second man pointed directly at the pile of debris where Rex had been digging. Something's definitely down there. Rex was nowhere to be seen, and Jake prayed his dog had the sense to stay hidden. The 2 men approached the hole, and Jake watched helplessly as they discovered the entrance he'd widened just minutes earlier. Vault access, the first man spoke into a radio. Send the extraction team. We have a Code 7 scenario. Whatever Code 7 meant, it didn't sound good. Jake weighed his options. He could try to slip out while they were focused on the vault entrance, but they'd spot him immediately. He could wait and hope they'd leave, but that seemed unlikely given their equipment and professional demeanor. The decision was made for him when the man with the scanner looked up sharply. I'm reading elevated levels inside the vault. Someone's been in there recently. Very recently. Sullivan's truck is in the driveway, the other man noted. He's here somewhere. Jake's blood turned to ice. They knew his name, his vehicle, probably everything about him. This wasn't a coincidence or a random discovery. These men had been watching, waiting. As quietly as possible, he began backing deeper into the vault, his mind racing through escape scenarios that all seemed hopeless. Behind him lay a fortune in stolen Nazi treasure. Ahead of him, armed government agents closed in. Rex's distant bark echoed through the building, followed by shouting. They'd found his dog. The metallic taste of fear coated Jake's mouth as he stared at the Nazi insignia glinting in his flashlight beam. Rex whined softly beside him, sensing the tension radiating from his master. The concrete vault stretched deeper into darkness than Jake's light could penetrate, and the musty air carried an odor that spoke of decades-old secrets. Jake forced himself to descend the crude steps, each footfall echoing hollowly in the confined space. The walls were rough concrete, hastily poured but solid as a fortress. Someone had built this to last, to protect whatever lay within from the ravages of time and discovery. His flashlight swept across wooden crates stacked along the walls, each bearing German markings burned into the wood. Some displayed the same SS lightning bolts he'd seen on the steel plate above. Others bore eagles and swastikas that made his skin crawl. Whatever this was, it wasn't just some forgotten storage room. The first crate Jake examined had a loose lid. His hands trembled as he pried it open, the old wood groaning in protest. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay dozens of small velvet pouches. He opened one with shaking fingers and gasped. Diamonds spilled into his palm like captured starlight, each stone the size of his thumbnail. "Jesus Christ!" he whispered, his voice barely audible in the vault's oppressive silence. Rex padded down the steps behind him, nose twitching at the strange scents. Jake's mind raced as he moved to the next crate. Gold bars, each stamped with Nazi eagles, lay stacked like cordwood. His rough calculation put their value in the millions, and this was just one container among dozens. The scope of what he'd discovered hit him like a physical blow. But it wasn't just treasure. As he ventured deeper into the vault, his light illuminated something that made his blood run cold. Wooden cases filled with documents, photographs, and what looked like scientific equipment. One open box revealed folders thick with papers covered in German script and diagrams he couldn't decipher. A photograph caught his eye. A black and white image of men in SS uniforms standing beside what looked like his workshop, though it appeared much newer in the picture. He recognized the distinctive roofline and the large oak tree, decades younger but unmistakably the same. The date stamp read 1943. Jake's hands shook as he photographed everything with his phone, though the camera flash seemed pathetically weak in the vast darkness. This wasn't just hidden Nazi loot. This was evidence of something larger, more sinister. His workshop hadn't been randomly chosen by fleeing war criminals. It had been part of their operation. The sound of Rex growling low in his throat made Jake spin around. The dog stood at the base of the steps, ears pricked forward, focused on something Jake couldn't see or hear. Then he heard it too, the distant rumble of an engine approaching along the dirt road that led to his property. Jake killed his flashlight instantly, plunging the vault into absolute darkness. His heart hammered against his ribs as he strained to listen. The engine sound grew closer, then stopped. Car doors slammed with metallic finality. Moving by feel, Jake grabbed Rex's collar and guided the dog toward the steps. They needed to get out of the vault and close the entrance before whoever was up there discovered what lay beneath the workshop floor. But as they climbed upward, Jake heard voices. At least two people, speaking in low, urgent tones. He paused at the top of the vault, listening through the steel plate above. The voices were inside his workshop now, moving with the confidence of people who knew exactly what they were looking for. One voice carried a slight accent Jake couldn't place, while the other spoke with the clipped precision of someone accustomed to giving orders. "The sensors detected the disturbance 3 hours ago," the accented voice said. "Someone has found the entrance." 60 years we've waited," came the reply. 60 years of watching, waiting for someone to buy this property and start digging around. Jake's blood turned to ice water. They'd been watching, waiting. His purchase of the workshop hadn't been the random bargain he'd thought. It had been orchestrated. But by whom? And how long had they known what lay buried here? Rex pressed against his leg, trembling with the effort to remain silent. Jake could feel the dog's muscles coiled tight, ready to defend his master if necessary. But against what? Who were these people, and what did they want with the Nazi vault? The footsteps above moved closer to the spot where the vault entrance lay hidden. Jake realized with growing horror that these weren't casual intruders. They knew exactly where to look, which meant they probably knew how to open the concealed entrance. He was trapped underground with his dog, sitting on top of what might be the largest Nazi treasure trove ever discovered, while unknown enemies gathered directly above his head. The phone rang at 6:30 in the morning, jolting Jake from a restless sleep. He'd spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, his mind churning over what lay beneath his property. Rex lifted his head from the foot of the bed, ears perked. "Mr. Sullivan?" The voice was crisp, professional. "This is Agent Sarah Chen with the FBI. We need to talk." Jake's blood turned to ice. "I'm sorry, who is this?" "Federal Bureau of Investigation. We received some interesting reports about your property yesterday. I'm 5 minutes out." The line went dead. Jake scrambled out of bed, pulling on jeans and a t-shirt. Through the window, he could see a black sedan already turning into his driveway. Rex growled low in his throat. Agent Chen was younger than her voice suggested, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of Jake's workshop as she stepped inside. Her partner, a heavy-set man who introduced himself as Agent Morrison, stayed by the door. "Nice place," Chen said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Been doing much digging lately?" Jake's mouth went dry. "Just some foundation work." "Right." She pulled out a tablet, swiping through what looked like surveillance photos. "We had an interesting visit from some German nationals yesterday. They seemed very curious about your recent activities." "German nationals?" "Klaus Richter and his associates. They flew in from Munich 2 days ago, made some calls to local contractors asking about ground-penetrating radar equipment." "Your name came up." Jake felt the walls closing in. "I don't know what you're talking about." Chen studied his face. "Mr. Sullivan, we know about the vault." The admission hit him like a physical blow. Morrison stepped closer, his hand resting casually near his jacket. "How?" Jake managed. "Satellite surveillance picked up unusual thermal signatures from your property. Our algorithms flagged it for review." Chen moved toward the spot where Rex had been digging. "Nazi treasure hunters have been working this region for decades. When we see certain patterns, foreign nationals with questionable backgrounds, sophisticated scanning equipment, properties with wartime history, we pay attention." Jake's mind raced. "What do you want?" "Your cooperation." She crouched down, running her fingers through the disturbed soil. "There are protocols for this kind of discovery. The FBI works with international partners to ensure stolen artifacts are returned to their rightful owners or appropriate museums. And if I don't cooperate," Morrison spoke for the first time, "then Klaus Richter gets here first and you end up in a shallow grave." The bluntness of it made Jake's knees weak. "Who is he?" "Son of SS Oberfuhrer Heinrich Richter. His father was responsible for looting museums and private collections across occupied Europe. Klaus has spent his life tracking down his father's hidden caches." Chen stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "He's not interested in historical preservation." Rex suddenly barked, racing toward the window. An engine rumbled in the distance, growing louder. "You expecting company?" Chen asked, her hand moving to her weapon. Jake peered through the dusty glass. A white van was approaching, followed by a dark Mercedes. "No, shit." Morrison was already on his radio. "We need backup at 1247 Mill Creek Road. Now." The vehicles stopped just outside the property line. 4 men emerged from the van, carrying equipment cases. From the Mercedes stepped an older man in an expensive suit, tall, silver-haired, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. "Klaus Richter," Chen breathed. "How did he know we were here?" The answer came as Jake spotted the small device Morrison was pulling from beneath his car's bumper. "GPS tracker. They've been watching us." Richter and his men approached the workshop. Even from a distance, Jake could see the cold calculation in the older man's eyes. These weren't treasure hunters, they were soldiers. "Back exit?" Chen asked urgently. "Through the house." Jake grabbed Rex's collar. "But they'll see us. Not if we give them something else to focus on." Morrison was already moving, speaking rapidly into his radio. "We need that backup, and we need it now." Chen pulled Jake toward the rear of the workshop. "Listen carefully. There's a safe house 15 miles north on Route 9, blue farmhouse with white shutters. If we get separated, go there." "What about the vault?" "Right now, staying alive is more important than whatever's down there." A sharp knock echoed through the workshop. Richter's voice carried clearly through the thin walls, accented English, polite but menacing. "Mr. Sullivan, we would very much like to speak with you." Chen pushed Jake toward the connecting door to his house. "Go. Take your dog and run." "What about you? We're federal agents. He can't just—" The workshop door exploded inward. Morrison dove for cover behind a workbench as armed figures poured through the opening. Chen shoved Jake hard, sending him stumbling into his kitchen. "Go, go!" Gunfire erupted behind them. Rex barked frantically as Jake grabbed his keys and bolted for the back door. His peaceful morning shattered, his simple life suddenly a battlefield where the stakes were life and death. The morning mist clung to the workshop's broken windows as Jake crouched beside the vault's entrance, Max pressed against his leg. 3 sleepless nights had given him time to think, and every rational thought screamed at him to walk away. But the irrational part, the part that had always gotten him into trouble, whispered that this could change everything. He'd spent hours researching the area's wartime history online. The workshop sat on land that had once been part of a larger estate owned by Heinrich Zimmer, a German industrialist who'd fled to America in 1938, claiming persecution. What Jake found in the digital archives of the local historical society painted a different picture. Zimmer hadn't been fleeing the Nazis. He'd been one of them, tasked with establishing sleeper cells and safe houses along the eastern seaboard. The implications made Jake's stomach churn. Whatever lay in that vault had been hidden by someone who'd planned for the Reich's resurgence. Max's sudden growl made Jake freeze. Through the workshop's grimy windows, he caught sight of a black sedan creeping up the gravel drive. No one knew about this place except... Jake's blood turned to ice. He'd told Sarah about the purchase. Sarah, who'd been asking too many questions about his finances lately. Sarah, who'd seemed strangely interested in the workshop's history when he'd mentioned it over dinner last week. The sedan's doors opened simultaneously, disgorging three figures in dark clothing. Professional, coordinated, not locals, and definitely not casual visitors. Jake grabbed Max's collar and backed toward the vault entrance. The metal ladder he'd found yesterday still leaned against the concrete wall, disappearing into the darkness below. He'd been planning to explore today anyway, but not like this, not as a desperate escape route. The sound of boots on gravel grew closer. Through the window, Jake watched the trio spread out with military precision. The leader, a woman with silver hair pulled back severely, gestured toward the workshop while speaking into a radio. Her companions moved like hunters stalking prey. Jake's decision crystallized in an instant. He grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight from his tool bag and swung one leg over the vault's edge. Max whined softly, sensing the tension. "Come on, boy," Jake whispered. "Time to see what Zimmer was hiding." The ladder felt solid despite its age, each rung biting into Jake's palms as he descended. The air grew noticeably cooler as he dropped below ground level, carrying a metallic taste that made his mouth dry. Max followed reluctantly, his claws scraping against the metal rungs. 20 feet down, Jake's boots touched solid ground. He clicked on the flashlight, and the beam revealed a narrow corridor stretching into darkness. The walls were lined with the same concrete as the entrance, but here they were decorated with something that made Jake's skin crawl. Carved eagles clutching swastikas, their wings spread in eternal salute to a fallen empire. Above, the workshop door crashed open. Jake killed the flashlight and pressed himself against the wall, one hand on Max's muzzle to keep him quiet. Voices drifted down the shaft, the silver-haired woman speaking rapid German to her companions. Jake caught only fragments, but vault, and before he finds it, came through clearly enough. They knew. Somehow, they knew exactly what he'd discovered. Moving by, feel alone, Jake crept deeper into the corridor. The walls seemed to pulse with history's weight, and more than once his shoulder brushed against something that felt disturbingly organic before his rational mind identified it as electrical conduits. The corridor ended at a heavy steel door marked with German text Jake couldn't read. But he didn't need translation to understand the warning symbols etched into the metal: radiation, biohazard, and something else that looked like a stylized skull. His hand found the door's wheel-shaped handle. It turned smoothly, as if it had been maintained despite decades of abandonment. The door swung open on silent hinges, revealing a chamber that made Jake's knees weak. The room beyond was vast, its walls lined with metal shelving that stretched up into darkness. But it wasn't the size that stole Jake's breath, it was the contents: gold bars stacked like bricks, canvas bags that could only contain precious stones, paintings in protective wrapping, their edges visible where the covering had deteriorated. And in the center of it all, a desk bearing an open ledger and what looked like operational plans spread across its surface. Even from the doorway, Jake could see photographs of buildings he recognized: the State House, the harbor, the university where Sarah worked. Max growled low in his throat, and Jake realized the chamber wasn't empty. From the shadows beyond his flashlight's reach came the sound of slow, deliberate applause. A figure stepped forward into the light, elderly but straight-backed, wearing an expression that belonged in a nightmare. "Guten Tag, Herr Sullivan," the man said in accented English. "We have been waiting for you." The workshop felt different now, charged with an electricity that made Jake's skin crawl. Every shadow seemed deeper, every creak of the old building more ominous. He'd barely slept, and when he had managed to drift off, his dreams were filled with jackboots and whispered German commands. Rex padded beside him as they approached the vault opening, the dog's ears constantly swiveling at sounds only he could hear. Jake had fashioned a makeshift cover from a tarp and some old lumber, but he knew it wouldn't fool anyone who came looking with serious intent. The morning light filtering through the grimy windows revealed fresh tire tracks in the dirt outside. Jake's blood ran cold as he counted them. At least 3 different vehicles had been here during the night, circling the property like vultures. He'd heard nothing, which meant whoever had been watching knew how to move quietly. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We know what you found. Meet us at the old Miller farm, Route 34, noon today. Come alone, bring nothing. Your cooperation ensures your safety." Jake's hands shook as he read it again. The Miller farm, he knew it, an abandoned property about 10 miles north, the kind of place where someone could disappear without a trace. But what choice did he have? These people, whoever they were, had been watching him. They knew where he lived, where he worked. Rex growled low in his throat, looking toward the front of the building. Jake heard it too, the soft purr of an expensive engine approaching slowly. He grabbed Rex's collar and pulled him behind a stack of old machinery, peering through the gaps in the metal. A black sedan stopped outside, its windows tinted dark enough to hide the occupants. For long minutes, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out, tall and elegant, despite the early hour. Her blonde hair was pulled back severely, and even from this distance, Jake could see the calculating intelligence in her pale eyes. She moved with military precision, scanning the area before approaching the workshop. Jake held his breath as she examined the tire tracks, then the building itself. When she reached the door, she didn't try to force it open. Instead, she pulled out a small device and ran it along the frame, checking for alarms or monitoring equipment. Finding none, she produced a set of lockpicks and had the door open in under 30 seconds. Jake pressed himself deeper into the shadows as she entered, her footsteps eerily silent on the concrete floor. Rex trembled with the effort of staying quiet, every muscle coiled for action. The woman moved through the workshop like she owned it, clearly knowing exactly what she was looking for. When she reached the area where Jake had positioned his makeshift cover, she smiled, a cold expression that never reached her eyes. "Impressive work," she said softly, her accent unmistakably German. "Though perhaps you should have been more careful about removing all the evidence." Jake's heart hammered as she knelt beside the vault opening, running her fingers along the edges of the concrete. She pulled out a small flashlight and peered into the depths, her breathing quickening with excitement. "Grandfather would be so proud," she whispered. "After all these years, the collection comes home." The pieces clicked together in Jake's mind with horrifying clarity. This wasn't just about Nazi gold or stolen artifacts. This was personal, a family legacy of blood and horror that someone was willing to kill to reclaim. The woman stood and pulled out her phone, speaking rapid German in hushed tones. Jake caught only fragments, but the words he understood made his blood freeze: schedule, extraction, cleanup, and most chilling of all, elimination. She ended the call and took one more long look around the workshop before heading for the door. As her footsteps faded, Jake heard her car start up and drive away, but he waited another 10 minutes before emerging from his hiding spot. His hands shook as he checked his phone again. The text was still there, the meeting at the Miller farm looming like a death sentence, but now he understood the stakes. These people weren't just treasure hunters, they were the descendants of the monsters who had hidden this vault in the first place, and they would stop at nothing to reclaim their blood legacy. Jake looked down at Rex, who gazed back with unwavering loyalty. Whatever happened at the Miller farm, he couldn't risk his dog's life. But he also couldn't simply run. The woman's examination of the vault told him she knew exactly what was down there, and she wouldn't stop hunting him until she had it. He had 5 hours to figure out how to survive a meeting with people who considered murder a reasonable business expense. 5 hours to decide whether he was brave enough to fight back against the shadows of history or smart enough to disappear before they swallowed him whole. The ticking of the old workshop clock seemed unnaturally loud as Jake began to plan for what might be the most important and final day of his life. The silence that followed Sarah's revelation stretched like a taut wire. Jake stared at the faded photograph she'd placed on his kitchen table, studying the face of a young woman who bore an unmistakable resemblance to Sarah herself. The woman stood beside a man in an SS uniform, her expression caught somewhere between defiance and terror. "Your grandmother," Jake said quietly. It wasn't a question. Anna Richter. She was 19 when the war ended. Sarah's voice carried a weight that seemed to age her before his eyes. She never spoke about what happened in those final months, but I found letters after she died. Letters she never sent, written to a sister who didn't survive Buchenwald. Rex lifted his head from where he'd been lying near the door, ears pricked forward. A moment later, Jake heard it too, the distant rumble of an engine on the rural road that led to his property. Sarah's head snapped toward the window. "Did you tell anyone else about this place?" she asked. "No one who'd have reason to come here." Jake moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peer out. A black SUV was turning into his driveway, moving slowly, deliberately. "Looks like your concern about being followed was justified." Sarah was already reaching into her bag, her hand emerging with a compact pistol that looked far from ornate. "How many ways out of here?" "Back door leads to the woods. There's an old deer trail that connects to the county road about half a mile north." Jake was moving even as he spoke, grabbing his keys and the metal box from the vault. "But they'll have that covered if they're professional." The SUV's engine cut off. Through the window, Jake watched two figures emerge, a tall man in a dark coat and a woman with short-cropped hair. They moved with the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to violence. "Heinrich's people?" Jake asked. "Worse. Those look like federal agents." Sarah was checking her weapon with the smooth motions of someone who'd done it countless times, which means someone in Washington is taking your discovery very seriously. Rex was on his feet now, a low growl building in his throat. Jake made a quick decision, grabbing the dog's leash from a hook by the door. "The workshop," he said. "If we can reach the tunnel entrance." A sharp knock interrupted him, followed by a voice that carried the unmistakable authority of a badge. "Mr. Sullivan, this is Agent Morrison with the Department of Justice. We need to speak with you about your recent archaeological discovery." Jake and Sarah exchanged glances. She held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. On the silent count, Jake opened the back door as quietly as possible while she moved toward the front of the house. "Mr. Sullivan, we know you're home. Your vehicle is in the driveway, and we have thermal imaging showing 2 people inside." The words stopped Jake cold. These weren't local investigators or treasure hunters playing at being professionals. This was the federal government, and they'd brought military-grade equipment to his rural workshop. "What do you want to do?" he whispered to Sarah. She was studying something on her phone, a map application that showed several red dots moving around Jake's property. 6 of them, 2 at the front, 2 circling to the back, 2 more setting up a perimeter. She looked up at him with grim determination. "They're not here to ask nicely." The sound of splintering wood came from the front door. Rex barked once, sharp and angry, before Jake grabbed his collar. "The tunnel it is," Jake said. They slipped out the back door just as shouts erupted from inside the house. Jake led them in a wide arc toward the workshop, using the larger building to screen their movement from the agents at the perimeter. Rex seemed to understand the need for stealth, padding silently through the tall grass despite every instinct that probably told him to bark at the intruders. The workshop's side door was still unlocked. Jake eased it open, listening for any sound that might indicate they'd been spotted. Nothing but the distant voices of agents searching his house. Inside the workshop, the hole that had started this entire nightmare looked even more ominous in the dim light. The ladder disappeared into darkness that suddenly seemed less like an adventure and more like a tomb. "You first," Sarah said, but Jake was already shaking his head. "Rex can't climb down a ladder. I'll lower him on the rope, but I need someone below to catch him." Sarah holstered her weapon and swung her leg over the edge of the hole. Your dog better not bite me. He won't. Rex is a good judge of character. As if summoned by the comment, shouts erupted from outside the workshop. Flashlight beams swept past the grimy windows, growing brighter and more focused with each pass. Sarah dropped into the tunnel just as the workshop door exploded inward. Jake grabbed Rex around the chest, swung the big dog over the hole's edge, and began lowering him as quickly as he dared. Above them, boots thundered across the workshop floor. The morning brought no comfort, only the weight of impossible decisions. Jake sat at his kitchen table, staring at photographs of artifacts that could rewrite history books, if he lived long enough to see them displayed in a museum. Rex lay at his feet, occasionally lifting his head at distant sounds that made Jake's pulse quicken. Sarah's laptop glowed between them, displaying the encrypted files they'd managed to decrypt through the night. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, cross-referencing symbols and dates with historical databases. The treasure wasn't just valuable, it was a roadmap to understanding how the Nazi regime had planned to rebuild after the war. "Look at this," Sarah whispered, pointing to a document filled with names and Swiss bank account numbers. "These aren't just storage records, they're distribution lists. The Nazis weren't just hiding treasure, they were creating a fund to finance a Fourth Reich." Jake studied the screen, his stomach churning. "Which means we're not just dealing with treasure hunters, we're dealing with people who still believe in that cause." A soft knock at the front door made them both freeze. Rex's ears perked up, but he didn't growl. A good sign. Jake moved to the window and peered through the curtain. A woman in her 60s stood on his porch, holding a manila envelope. She looked nervous but not threatening. "Dr. Elizabeth Hoffman," she said when Jake opened the door. "I believe you have something that belonged to my grandfather." Sarah positioned herself where she could see the woman, but remain hidden. Jake kept his hand near the gun tucked in his waistband. "I'm not sure what you mean." "My grandfather was SS Oberfuhrer Klaus Hoffmann. He was assigned to Operation Bernhard before the war ended." Her English carried a slight German accent. "I've spent 30 years trying to find what he hid, not to profit from it, but to ensure it reaches the proper authorities." Jake studied her face, searching for deception. "Why should I trust you?" Elizabeth opened the envelope and withdrew a photograph. It showed a young man in an SS uniform standing next to an older man Jake recognized from the vault's documents. "Because I know you found the vault, and I know others are coming for you." "What others?" "The Kruger family still believes in my grandfather's cause. They've been tracking the same leads I have, but for very different reasons. They arrived in town yesterday." Sarah appeared in the doorway. "How do we know you're not working with them?" Elizabeth's face hardened. "Because they killed my brother in Munich last month when he refused to tell them what he knew about the vault's location. I want justice, not profit." Jake made a decision that could cost him everything. "Come inside." Over the next hour, Elizabeth shared what she knew. Her grandfather had been ordered to establish the vault as part of a larger network designed to fund Nazi operations after Germany's defeat. He'd hidden the location from his superiors, planning to surrender it to Allied forces, but was killed in the final days of the war before he could make contact. "The Kruger family has been systematically eliminating anyone with knowledge of these vaults," Elizabeth explained. "They believe they're preserving their inheritance, their destiny." Sarah pulled up surveillance footage from the town's main street. "Is that them?" Elizabeth nodded grimly. 3 men in dark clothing had taken rooms at the local motel. They moved with military precision, and Jake noticed the bulges under their jackets that suggested concealed weapons. "We need to get this information to the authorities before they find us," Jake said. "It's not that simple," Elizabeth replied. "My contacts at the German Federal Intelligence Service have been monitoring this situation. They believe there's a leak in the American intelligence community. Someone's been feeding information to the Kruger family about ongoing investigations." Jake's phone buzzed. Marcus Chen's name appeared on the screen. Against his better judgment, Jake answered. "Don't say anything." Chen's voice was urgent, barely above a whisper. "Just listen. There's been a development. The federal task force has been compromised. Agent Walker isn't who she claims to be. Her real name is Anna Kruger. The phone went dead. Jake stared at the device, his blood running cold. "What is it?" Sarah asked. "Walker is one of them." Jake moved to the window. A black SUV was parked at the end of his driveway, engine running. "We need to leave, now." Elizabeth stood. "I have a safe house. My contacts can extract us, but we need to move the artifacts first." "No," Jake said firmly. "We don't know you well enough to trust you with everything." "Then we split up," Sarah suggested. "Take different routes. Make them choose who to follow." Rex barked sharply. Through the back window, Jake saw figures moving through the trees behind his property. They were running out of time, and every choice seemed to lead deeper into a maze with no clear exit. The vault's secrets were about to cost them more than Jake had ever imagined. The warehouse smelled of rust and decades of abandonment. Jake pressed his back against a concrete pillar, listening to the echo of footsteps somewhere in the darkness beyond. Rex remained perfectly still beside him, ears perked, muscles coiled like springs. "I know you're in here, Sullivan." Heinrich's voice carried across the cavernous space, distorted by the metal rafters overhead. "You cannot run forever." Jake's grip tightened on the Luger he'd taken from one of Heinrich's men. 3 bullets left, maybe 4. He'd lost count during the chaos at the workshop. The vault's contents, documents, gold bars, and what appeared to be detailed maps of other hidden Nazi caches sat heavy in the duffel bag at his feet. A beam of light swept across the far wall, then another. At least 2 of them, maybe more. Jake had managed to lose them in the industrial maze on the outskirts of town, but his truck's engine had finally given out. The warehouse had been his only option for cover. Rex's low growl warned him a split second before the footsteps grew closer. Jake signaled for silence, then peered around the pillar. A figure moved between the abandoned machinery, flashlight cutting through shadows like a blade. The man was 20 feet away. Too close. Jake weighed his options. The rear exit was another 100 yards through open space, impossible to reach without being spotted. The loading dock to his left offered better cover, but he'd have to cross an open area to reach it. "Perhaps we can make a deal," Heinrich called out. "You keep the gold. I only want the documents." Jake almost laughed. Heinrich's definition of deal likely involved bullets. But the offer confirmed what Jake had suspected. The real treasure wasn't the gold bars, it was the intelligence hidden in those Nazi files. A metallic clang echoed from the opposite side of the warehouse. Jake tensed, then realized it was a distraction. Heinrich was trying to flush him out, make him move toward the sound while his men closed in from behind. The footsteps were closer now. 15 feet. 10. Rex shifted, ready to spring. Jake placed a calming hand on the dog's neck, feeling the animal's barely contained energy. Not yet. Wait for the right moment. The beam of light swung toward their position. Jake held his breath, pressing deeper into shadow. The light passed by, missing them by inches. Then Rex erupted into motion. The dog launched himself at the approaching figure before Jake could stop him. A shout of surprise, followed by the crash of the man hitting the concrete floor. His flashlight skittered away, beams spinning wildly before going dark. "Hans!" Heinrich's voice cracked across the warehouse. "Hans, report!" Jake was already moving. He snatched the duffel bag and sprinted toward the loading dock, Rex at his heels. Gunfire erupted behind them, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like deadly fireworks. A bullet sparked off a metal beam inches from Jake's head. Another punched through a stack of rotting pallets to his right. He dove behind a rusted conveyor belt as automatic weapons fire shredded the air where he'd been standing. The loading dock was 30 yards away. Open ground, suicide. Staying put meant certain death. Heinrich's men were closing in from multiple directions now, their flashlights creating a deadly web of light. Jake spotted a fire axe mounted on the wall nearby. Emergency equipment, probably hadn't been touched in years. He army-crawled toward it, keeping the conveyor belt between himself and the shooters. Glass shattered somewhere overhead, skylights taking hits from wild gunfire. Fragments rained down like crystal snow. The axe came free from its mounting with a rusty screech. Jake hefted the unfamiliar weight, then spotted what he was looking for, the warehouse's main electrical panel, 20 feet to his left. Another burst of gunfire forced him flat as bullets chewed up concrete near his position. Rex had found cover behind an overturned forklift, yellow eyes reflecting the muzzle flashes. "You're only making this harder on yourself," Heinrich shouted. "Surrender now and I promise you a quick death." Jake laughed grimly. Heinrich's promises weren't worth the breath used to make them. He gathered himself, then sprinted toward the electrical panel. Bullets whined past him, one close enough to burn his cheek. The axe blade bit deep into the panel's metal housing with a shower of sparks. The warehouse plunged into absolute darkness. Shouts of confusion erupted from Heinrich's men. Flashlight beams swung wildly, creating more confusion than illumination. Jake used the chaos to move, Rex following his whispered commands. They reached the loading dock as Heinrich's voice rose above the confusion, barking orders in rapid German. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in sickly red illumination. Jake found the manual release for the loading dock door. It groaned upward with agonizing slowness, revealing the pre-dawn darkness outside. Almost there, almost free. Then he saw the black SUVs waiting in the parking lot, engines running, and his heart sank. Heinrich had planned for this possibility. They were trapped. The safe house felt like a tomb. Jake paced the narrow living room while Rex lay by the window, ears twitching at every sound from the street below. Elena sat cross-legged on the threadbare couch, her laptop balanced on her knees as she typed furiously. "The 100M," she said without looking up. "Hitler's occult research division. They weren't just collecting artifacts. They were hunting for anything that could give the Reich a supernatural edge in the war." Jake stopped pacing. "Supernatural? Don't look at me like that. The Nazis believed in this stuff. They sent expeditions to Tibet, Egypt, South America, looking for relics, ancient weapons, anything that might tip the scales." Her fingers flew across the keyboard. The crown of Charlemagne was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Through the window, Jake spotted a black sedan parked across the street that hadn't been there an hour ago. Two figures sat motionless in the front seats. He pulled the curtain closed and moved away from the glass. "We need to move," he said. Elena's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and her face went pale. "It's a message from Klaus. He says he has something we need to see." "Klaus? The guy who tried to kill us yesterday. He says he has proof about who's really behind this. And Jake," she held up the phone, "he knows where Sarah is." Jake's blood turned to ice. He'd been trying not to think about his sister, hoping she was safely ignorant of everything happening. "But if Klaus had her, it's obviously a trap," Elena said. "Obviously." Jake was already grabbing his jacket. "But we're going anyway." Rex jumped to his feet, sensing the change in mood. Jake clipped on his leash, checked the Glock tucked in his waistband, and headed for the door. "Wait." Elena caught his arm. "There's something else. I've been tracking the other vault locations, cross-referencing them with recent archaeological permits and land purchases." She turned the laptop toward him. "Look at this pattern." The screen showed a map of North America dotted with red markers. Jake counted at least a dozen, scattered from British Columbia to Mexico. "Someone's been systematically acquiring properties above suspected vault sites for the past 5 years, Elena continued. "Shell companies, offshore accounts, but when you dig deep enough, they all trace back to the same source." "Who?" "A consortium called Schwarzsonne Holdings, Black Sun. And guess who sits on their board of directors?" Jake studied the corporate document she'd pulled up. The names meant nothing to him until he reached the bottom of the list. His breath caught. Marcus Kellerman, Senior Advisor, U.S. Department of Antiquities. "The same department that's been chasing us," Elena said. "This isn't about recovering stolen Nazi gold for some museum. This is about completing what the Anunnaki started." Jake's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him swipe to accept. "Mr. Sullivan." The voice was calm, cultured, with the faintest trace of a German accent. "My name is Dr. Victor Zimmermann. I believe you have something that belongs to my family. Never heard of you." "Oh, but you have. My grandfather was Oberfuhrer Heinrich Zimmermann, director of the North American Archaeological Division of the 100M. The vault you discovered was his life's work." Jake gestured frantically to Elena, who started typing on her laptop. "If you're looking for your grandfather's war crimes memorabilia, try eBay." A soft chuckle. "You misunderstand the significance of what you've found, Mr. Sullivan. The crown is not merely a relic, it's a key, one of 13 artifacts that, when properly assembled, will unlock something far more valuable than gold. Let me guess. Ancient alien technology? The Holy Grail? Atlantis?" "Knowledge, Mr. Sullivan. The location of the Thule cache, Hitler's ultimate treasure vault, containing not just stolen wealth but technologies and secrets that could reshape the modern world. Your discovery was merely the beginning." Elena held up her laptop screen. She'd found a photograph of Victor Zimmermann, sharp features, steel grey hair, cold blue eyes. Below it, a bio that made Jake's stomach drop. PhD in archaeology from Oxford, former consultant to various intelligence agencies, currently CEO of Schwarzer Sonne Holdings. "What do you want?" Jake asked. "A simple exchange. The crown and all accompanying materials for your sister's continued well-being. She's quite lovely, by the way. Reminds me of someone I once knew." Jake's grip tightened on the phone. "If you hurt her..." The Gothic bridge in Central Park. Midnight. Come alone, bring the crown, and Miss Sullivan will be returned unharmed. Attempt any tricks, involve the authorities, or fail to appear, and she'll simply vanish, like so many others over the years. The line went dead. Jake stared at the phone, his mind racing. Across the room, Rex had started growling low in his throat, hackles raised as if sensing danger through the walls themselves. Elena closed her laptop. "So, what's the plan?" "We're going to give him exactly what he wants," Jake said. "Just not the way he expects." The abandoned warehouse squatted like a concrete beast against the storm-darkened sky, its broken windows staring blindly across the industrial wasteland. Jake cut the engine 3 blocks away, his hands trembling as he gripped the steering wheel. The GPS coordinates from Heinrich's files had led them here, to this forgotten corner of the city where legitimate business died decades ago. "This feels like a trap," Sarah whispered, checking her weapon for the 3rd time. Rex whined softly from the back seat, sensing the tension that crackled between them like electricity. Jake's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered without speaking. "You came alone, I trust." Heinrich's cultured voice carried clearly through the speaker. "Good. Your government friends would only complicate matters. Where's my sister?" "Safe, for the moment. Building 17, 2nd floor." "Come alone, Herr Sullivan. Your dog may accompany you. I suspect he's been quite helpful in your recent endeavors." The line went dead. Jake stared at the phone, then at Sarah. "You heard him. I'm not letting you go in there alone." "You don't have a choice." He grabbed her hand. "Someone needs to stay alive to tell this story if things go sideways. Give me 20 minutes, then call Marcus." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Jake clipped Rex's leash and stepped into the howling wind. Rain lashed his face as they approached the warehouse district, each footstep echoing off wet pavement like gunshots. Building 17 loomed ahead, its loading dock doors hanging open like broken teeth. Jake's heart hammered as he climbed the external stairs, Rex padding silently beside him. The dog's hackles were raised, a low growl rumbling deep in his throat. The 2nd floor was a maze of empty offices and abandoned equipment. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting sickly shadows that danced with each lightning flash. Jake followed the sound of voices deeper into the building, his mouth dry as dust. He found them in what had once been a conference room. Emma sat tied to a chair in the center, her face pale but determined. Heinrich stood behind her, impeccably dressed despite the circumstances, while 2 other men flanked the room's entrance. One Jake recognized as the scarred assassin from the workshop. The other was younger, blonde, with the same cold blue eyes as Heinrich. "My grandson, Klaus," Heinrich said by way of introduction. "He shares my enthusiasm for family legacy." "Let her go," Jake said, his voice steadier than he felt. "You want the location of the vault. I want my sister. Simple trade." Heinrich smiled. "Nothing about this situation is simple, Herr Sullivan. You've caused considerable difficulty for my organization. 3 dead operatives, valuable intelligence compromised, government attention we'd prefer to avoid." Rex's growl intensified. The scarred man's hand moved toward his weapon, but Heinrich raised a finger. "However," the old Nazi continued, "I'm a practical man. You will provide the exact coordinates of the vault, along with any artifacts you've already recovered. In exchange, your sister lives, and then you kill us both anyway. Quite likely. But this way she lives a few minutes longer. Surely that's worth something to you." Emma met Jake's eyes and gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. She'd spotted something he'd missed. Klaus had moved closer to the window, positioning himself between Heinrich and the fire escape. The grandson wasn't here just as backup. He was here to ensure the old man didn't walk away from this meeting. Thunder crashed overhead, masking the sound of footsteps in the corridor. Jake's 20 minutes were up. Sarah hadn't waited. "The coordinates are on this," Jake said, pulling out his phone. "But I need proof she's unharmed first." Heinrich nodded to the scarred man, who roughly grabbed Emma's arm and hauled her to her feet. She winced but remained silent. That's when Jake saw the small black device she'd been hiding, a GPS tracker, probably Sarah's. "Satisfied?" Heinrich asked. Jake started to respond when Rex suddenly lunged forward, barking furiously. The dog had sensed what Jake's human ears had missed, the soft whisper of tactical boots on concrete. The scarred man spun toward the sound, his weapon clearing leather just as the conference room door exploded inward. Marcus burst through in full tactical gear, his team flowing around him like deadly smoke. "Federal agents, nobody move." The room erupted into chaos. Heinrich dove for cover behind an overturned desk while Klaus went for his gun. Jake threw himself toward Emma as bullets began to fly, Rex's protective instincts driving him to circle them both. The scarred assassin's first shot shattered the window behind Heinrich's head. His second punched through Klaus's shoulder, spinning the younger man around. Emma rolled away from her chair, the zip ties Sarah had partially cut finally snapping free. Heinrich's voice rose above the gunfire, shouting orders in rapid German. Through the broken windows, Jake could see muzzle flashes from the adjacent building. The old Nazi hadn't come alone either. This wasn't just a hostage exchange anymore. It was a full-scale war. The abandoned warehouse district stretched before them like a concrete graveyard, shadows pooling between rusted shipping containers and skeletal cranes. Jake's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as he navigated the rental car through potholes deep enough to swallow a tire. Beside him, Elena checked her pistol for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. "This feels like a trap," she muttered, scanning the empty loading docks through the passenger window. Jake couldn't argue. The anonymous message had been too convenient. Coordinates leading to this forsaken industrial wasteland outside Baltimore, along with a promise that Dr. Heinrich Stolz would be waiting with answers about the Nazi vault. But with government agents breathing down their necks and Klaus Richter's mercenaries still hunting them, they were running out of options. There, Elena pointed to a weathered warehouse marked with faded numbers. Building 47. Jake parked behind a stack of corrugated metal sheeting, leaving the engine running. Through the windshield, the warehouse looked abandoned, its windows boarded up and weeds growing through cracks in the loading dock, but a thin wisp of smoke curled from a ventilation shaft, betraying signs of life within. They approached the side entrance cautiously, Jake's hand resting on the Luger tucked beneath his jacket, the same weapon they'd found in the vault. The irony wasn't lost on him. Elena moved with practiced stealth, her back against the wall as she peered around corners. The door stood slightly ajar. Jake pushed it open, wincing as rusted hinges groaned in protest. Inside, emergency lighting cast everything in sickly yellow hues. Their footsteps echoed off concrete floors as they made their way deeper into the cavernous space. "Mr. Sullivan." The voice emerged from the shadows near a stack of wooden crates. An elderly man stepped forward, leaning heavily on a walking stick. His gaunt frame suggested someone well into his 80s, but his eyes remained sharp and calculating. "I am Dr. Stolz. Thank you for coming." "You said you had information about the vault," Jake said, keeping his distance. "About what we found." Stolz nodded slowly, his weathered face creased with what might have been regret. "Indeed. Information that could save your life, or end it depending on your choices." He gestured toward a makeshift sitting area illuminated by battery-powered lanterns. "Please sit. This story requires context." Elena remained standing, her hand near her weapon. "Talk." "Very well." Stolz lowered himself onto a crate with obvious difficulty. "The vault you discovered was one of 7 constructed by the 100M, the SS research division, in the final months of the war. Each contained not just gold and artifacts, but something far more dangerous." Jake felt his stomach tighten. What kind of dangerous? Research documents, biological weapons, chemical formulas. Stolz's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Things that should have died with the Reich, but which certain parties have spent decades trying to recover. The old man reached into his coat, moving slowly to avoid alarming them. He withdrew a leather portfolio tied with string. "I was there when they sealed the vaults. A young researcher, horrified by what I'd witnessed. I kept detailed records, hoping someday justice might be served." Elena stepped closer, her suspicion evident. "If you were SS, why should we trust you?" "Because," Stolz said, meeting her gaze steadily, "I have spent the last 70 years trying to prevent what Klaus Richter and his followers want to accomplish. The items in that vault aren't just valuable. They're the key to weapons technology that could destabilize the world." Jake's mind raced. "The government agents who raided my property, they're not after the gold either." "Correct. Agent Morrison and her team represent a classified joint task force dedicated to containing Nazi-era WMDs. They will stop at nothing to secure those materials, even if it means eliminating you." Stolz untied the portfolio and removed a yellowed document. "This is a manifest of everything stored in the Maryland vault. Study it carefully." Elena snatched the paper and scanned its contents, her face growing pale. "Jesus. Anthrax samples, sarin gas components, research notes on—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "On weaponizing plague bacteria, yes." Stolz nodded grimly. The vault was sealed because even the SS recognized the danger. But now, with modern technology, those primitive prototypes could be refined into something truly horrific. The warehouse suddenly felt colder. Jake realized they had stumbled into something far beyond buried treasure. They were sitting at the center of a potential biological catastrophe. "There's more," Stolz continued. "Richter isn't working alone. He has contacts in several governments, black market dealers who would pay billions for access to that research. If he reaches the vault first—" A distant rumble cut through the air, vehicles approaching fast. Elena cursed and moved to the nearest window, peering through a gap in the boards. "Company," she announced tersely. "Black SUVs moving in formation." Stolz struggled to his feet, sudden urgency replacing his measured tone. "There's a service tunnel beneath this building. It connects to the old subway line." He pressed a metal key into Jake's palm. "This opens a safety deposit box in Philadelphia. Inside, you'll find everything you need to stop Richter, but only if you reach it before he reaches the vault." The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the warehouse. The safe house felt like a prison as dawn broke through the grimy windows. Jake paced the narrow hallway, his footsteps echoing off bare walls, while his German shepherd, Rex, watched from his position by the door. Every creak of the old building made Jake's hand drift to the Glock tucked in his waistband, a nervous habit he'd developed since acquiring a $100 million target on his back. Sarah emerged from the makeshift command center they'd established in the living room, her laptop balanced precariously on stacked crates. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, evidence of another sleepless night spent monitoring encrypted communications and tracking their pursuers' movements. "The Richter Group made contact with someone in the State Department," she said, setting the laptop on the kitchen counter. "They're claiming legal ownership of the vault's contents under some obscure restitution law." Jake stopped pacing. "Legal ownership? They're descendants of the SS officers who stole it in the first place." "Doesn't matter. They've hired a team of international lawyers, and they're arguing that since their ancestors were entrusted with protecting the artifacts, they have hereditary claims." Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up legal documents. "It's complete fabrication, but they have money and connections." Through the window, Jake spotted a black sedan that hadn't been there the night before. His blood chilled as he recognized the license plate pattern. "Government issue. We've got company." Sarah slammed the laptop shut and grabbed the encrypted hard drive containing their research. Rex was already at Jake's side, muscles tensed and ready. The dog's ears swiveled toward the front entrance, confirming what Jake feared: multiple sets of footsteps approaching. They moved with practiced efficiency toward the back exit, an escape route they'd planned but hoped never to use. Jake's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Dr. Mueller, the historian who'd been helping them authenticate the vault's contents. He declined the call, but it immediately rang again. "Answer it," Sarah whispered as they crept through the rear hallway. "Put it on speaker." "Dr. Mueller?" "Jake, thank God. Listen carefully. I've discovered something about the vault that changes everything." Muller's voice was strained, urgent. "The Nazi records I've been translating, they weren't just storing stolen artifacts. They were using the vault as a dead drop for ongoing operations. There are names, locations, financial accounts that are still active." The front door exploded inward as federal agents breached the entrance. Jake grabbed Sarah's hand and bolted for the back door, Rex bounding ahead of them. Muller's voice continued through the phone speaker as they ran. "The Richter family isn't just claiming inheritance rights. They're trying to cover up evidence that their network never disbanded. Some of those Swiss accounts are still funding operations today." Jake pocketed the phone as they burst through the rear exit into the alley behind the safe house. Their stolen Honda waited exactly where they'd left it, but another black sedan was already blocking the far end of the narrow passage. "This way." Sarah pointed toward a gap between buildings barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. Rex hesitated for a moment, then followed them into the cramped space between two brick walls. Behind them, shouts erupted as the federal agents discovered their escape route. Jake could hear dogs barking, tracking dogs that would easily follow Rex's scent. They had minutes at most before the net closed completely. They emerged onto a busy street filled with morning commuters. Jake forced himself to walk normally, despite every instinct screaming at him to run. Sarah pulled a baseball cap low over her face, while Rex trotted beside them like any ordinary pet. "The storage unit," Sarah murmured. "We need to get to the storage unit." Jake nodded. 3 blocks away, they'd rented a small space under false names, stashing duplicate copies of their most important evidence. If they could reach it, they might still have leverage in whatever deadly game they'd stumbled into. Dr. Mueller called again as they ducked into a coffee shop to avoid another government vehicle cruising slowly down the street. This time, his voice carried a note of panic. "They took my research, Jake. Armed men, professional operatives. But I managed to hide something, coordinates to a second vault. The Nazis built a backup site, and I think the Richter Group doesn't know about it yet." Jake's pulse quickened. "Where?" "Northern Michigan, near the Straits of Mackinac. There's an abandoned mining complex that the Germans used as a staging area. If you can reach it first." The line went dead. Through the coffee shop window, Jake watched as federal agents systematically searched the buildings along the street. Sarah was already pulling up maps on her phone, studying routes north. Rex pressed against Jake's leg, sensing the tension that radiated from both humans. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of places to hide. But somewhere in the Michigan wilderness lay their one chance at turning the tables on enemies who'd been hunting them across 2 continents. Jake finished his coffee and stood up. It was time to go on the offensive. The abandoned textile mill loomed against the storm-darkened sky like a monument to industrial decay. Jake gripped the steering wheel tighter as lightning illuminated the crumbling brick facade, counting the seconds until thunder rolled across the Pennsylvania countryside. 3 seconds. The storm was closing in fast. "This is insane," Sarah muttered from the passenger seat, her fingers drumming nervously against the door handle. "We should have gone to the FBI." "With what evidence?" Jake pulled into the shadow of the loading dock. "Hoffman has contacts everywhere. We need proof before we surface again." Rex whined softly from the back seat, his ears pinned back against the thunder. The German shepherd had been on edge since they'd fled the safe house 12 hours ago, somehow sensing the danger that seemed to follow them like a persistent shadow. Jake killed the engine and checked his phone. The encrypted message from Marcus had been brief but clear: 3rd floor, northwest corner. "Come alone. Trust no one else." "Marcus better have answers," Sarah said, shouldering her backpack. Inside were the photographs she'd taken of the vault's contents before Hoffman's men had arrived, their only remaining evidence of the Nazi treasure that had turned their lives upside down. They slipped through a gap in the chain-link fence, Rex padding silently beside them. The mill's windows stared down like hollow eyes, most of the glass long since shattered by vandals or weather. Jake led them to a service entrance where the lock had been cut, exactly as Marcus had promised. Inside, the air hung thick with decades of abandonment, rusted metal, rotting wood, and something else Jake couldn't identify. Their footsteps echoed off concrete floors littered with debris as they navigated by flashlight toward the stairwell. "Jake!" Sarah's whisper was sharp with alarm. He followed her gaze to fresh tire tracks in the dust outside. Multiple vehicles, recent enough that the tread patterns were still clearly defined. His stomach dropped as Rex's hackles rose, a low growl rumbling in the dog's throat. They weren't alone. Jake drew the Glock he'd taken from Hoffman's man, checking the chamber as quietly as possible. "Stay close," he breathed. "If this goes sideways, get to the car and drive. I'm not leaving you. You will if I tell you to." They climbed the stairs in tense silence, pausing at each landing to listen. On the 2nd floor, Jake heard voices. At least 3 distinct speakers, their words too muffled to understand, but their tone unmistakably urgent. The 3rd floor stretched before them like a maze of machinery and support columns. Jake clicked off his flashlight, relying on the intermittent lightning flashes through broken windows to navigate. Rex stayed pressed against his leg, the dog's training keeping him silent despite his obvious agitation. A figure stepped out from behind a massive loom 30 feet away. "Jake Sullivan." The voice carried a slight German accent that made Jake's blood run cold. "You've been very difficult to locate." More figures emerged from the shadows. 5 men in tactical gear, weapons trained on Jake's position, but no Marcus. Jake's heart sank as he realized the trap they'd walked into. "Where's Marcus?" Jake called out, not lowering his weapon despite being severely outgunned. "Your friend is indisposed." The leader stepped forward, his face briefly illuminated by lightning. Scarred features, cold eyes, and an air of barely contained violence. "I am Klaus Richter. Perhaps you recognize the name?" Jake's blood turned to ice. Richter, one of the names from the vault documents, a descendant of SS Oberfuhrer Heinrich Richter, one of the Nazi officers who'd helped establish the treasure cache. "The photographs," Richter continued. "Where are they?" Sarah's hand found Jake's arm, her grip tight with fear. Rex's growling intensified, the sound barely audible but vibrating through Jake's leg. "Even if I had them," Jake said, "what makes you think I'd give them to you?" Richter's smile was winter cold. "Because otherwise, many people will die. Starting with your friend Marcus, then the woman beside you, then anyone else unfortunate enough to have become involved in this matter." Lightning strobed again, and in that instant, Jake saw something that made his heart race with desperate hope. Marcus, bound and bloodied but alive, tied to a support beam 20 feet behind Richter's men. His friend's eyes were alert, focused, and he gave an almost imperceptible nod towards something in the shadows. Jake's mind raced through possibilities. 5 armed men, Sarah behind him, Rex ready to attack on command, Marcus positioned as a human shield, and somewhere in this industrial graveyard, whatever Marcus had discovered that was worth risking all their lives. The photographs are in the car, Jake lied, hoping to buy time. I can get them. I think not. Richter raised his weapon. Search them. Thunder crashed overhead, and in that deafening moment, Jake made his choice. He shoved Sarah toward cover, shouted Rex's attack command, and dove sideways as muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like deadly fireworks. The battle for the Nazi treasure had begun. The safe house felt more like a fortress than the run-down cabin it appeared to be from the outside. Steel plates reinforced the walls beneath weathered wood siding, and Jake noticed motion sensors tucked discreetly among the pine branches. Agent Martinez had brought them here after the warehouse shootout, promising answers that Jake was beginning to doubt would ever come. "The vault you discovered belongs to Oberfuhrer Heinrich Kessler," Martinez began, spreading photographs across the scarred wooden table. SS intelligence officer who disappeared in 1944 with a fortune in stolen artifacts and Nazi gold. Jake studied the black and white photos showing a stern-faced man in SS uniform. "So why didn't you just tell me this from the beginning?" "Because we weren't sure what we were dealing with." Martinez pulled out a thick file. Kessler wasn't just any Nazi. He ran a network called Operation Bernhard, counterfeiting Allied currency while stealing priceless artifacts from across occupied Europe. When the war turned against Germany, he vanished. Sarah leaned forward, her laptop open beside her. "I've been cross-referencing the artifacts we photographed. Some of these pieces were thought destroyed in the war. This Monet alone is worth 20 million. Thunder rumbled outside, and Rex lifted his head from where he lay by the fireplace, ears alert. The dog had been restless since they'd arrived, as if sensing danger in every shadow. "There's more," Martinez continued. "Our intelligence suggests Kessler had help. Someone in the American military facilitated his escape to the States. He lived under a false identity for decades, but he never accessed the vault. We think he died before he could retrieve it." "Then why are so many people trying to kill us for it?" Jake demanded. Martinez exchanged glances with her partner, Agent Chen, who had been silent until now. "Because Kessler had a son, Wilhelm Kessler, now calling himself William Kessler. He spent his entire life searching for his father's hidden fortune." The photograph Martinez slid across the table made Jake's blood freeze. The man who'd been hunting them, the one who'd orchestrated the attacks, stared back at him with cold, calculating eyes. "He's here, in the area." Chen spoke for the first time. "Our surveillance indicates he arrived 3 days ago with a team of mercenaries, professional killers who specialize in retrieval operations." Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard. "I'm seeing news reports about unusual activity in town. Several strangers asking questions about the old workshop, people offering cash for information." A sharp crack from somewhere outside made them all freeze. Rex was on his feet instantly, a low growl rumbling from his chest. Martinez drew her weapon, motioning for silence. "Could be a branch," Chen whispered, but his hand was already moving toward his gun. Jake felt his heart hammering as he remembered the warehouse, the bullets whining past his head, the cold efficiency of their attackers. "How did you know to find us there?" "We've been tracking electronic chatter," Martinez explained quietly, her eyes fixed on the windows. "Kessler's people have been monitoring police frequencies, emergency services. They knew about the warehouse before we did." Another sound, definitely footsteps this time, crunching through the undergrowth outside. Rex's growl deepened, and the hair along his back stood up. "Back room, now," Martinez commanded in a harsh whisper. They moved quickly through the cabin, Jake's mind racing. How many times could they run before someone's luck ran out? How many safe houses were there, and would any of them actually be safe? The back room was smaller, windowless, with what looked like a steel door set into the floor. probably leading to an underground tunnel. Government paranoia or practical escape route, Jake couldn't tell which. "Listen carefully," Martinez said, her voice urgent but controlled. "If this goes bad, you take that tunnel. It leads to a stream about half a mile north. Follow the water downstream until you reach the highway, then call this number." She pressed a card into Sarah's hand. "What about the vault?" Sarah whispered. "All those stolen artifacts. They belong in museums, returned to families. First, we have to live long enough to make that happen," Jake replied grimly. A window shattered somewhere in the front of the cabin, followed by the distinctive pop-pop-pop of suppressed gunfire. Rex barked once, sharp and warning, before Jake grabbed his collar. "Go, go, go!" Martinez shoved them toward the floor hatch. Jake pulled the heavy steel door open, revealing a narrow ladder descending into darkness. The sound of splintering wood came from the main room, the front door giving way. Sarah went first, her laptop bag slung across her shoulder. Jake followed with Rex, the dog surprisingly calm as Jake carried him down into the tunnel. Above them, he could hear Martinez and Chen taking positions, their voices tense but professional. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for Jake's shoulders, but it was their only chance. As they crawled through the darkness, the sound of gunfire erupted behind them, and Jake realized that nowhere was safe, not anymore. The abandoned steel mill loomed against the storm-darkened sky like a monument to decay. Jake crouched behind a rusted shipping container, watching Schmidt's men take positions around the perimeter. Lightning illuminated their movements in stark, stuttering frames, shadows with assault rifles spreading through the industrial graveyard. 30 seconds, Elena whispered into her radio, her voice barely audible above the thunder. She was positioned 50 yards to his left, hidden behind the skeletal remains of a crane. "Remember, we need Schmidt alive. He's the only one who knows where the rest of the network operates." Jake's grip tightened on the detonator Chen had given him. The explosives were already in place, shaped charges rigged to the mill's support columns, timed to create a controlled collapse that would trap Schmidt's forces without bringing the entire structure down. At least, that was the theory. Rex pressed against his leg, the German shepherd's muscles coiled with tension. The dog had been restless all evening, sensing the approaching confrontation. Jake scratched behind his ears, drawing comfort from the familiar gesture. It felt like a lifetime ago that Rex had first dug up that damned vault in his workshop. Movement on the north entrance. Agent Morrison's voice crackled through the earpiece. The FBI task force was positioned in the outer ring, ready to clean up whatever emerged from the mill. 3 vehicles, black SUVs. Jake watched as Schmidt's convoy pulled up to the building's main entrance. The old SS officer stepped out of the lead vehicle, his silver hair whipping in the wind. Even at this distance, Jake could see the man's rigid posture, the military bearing that 60 years hadn't erased. "Target acquired," Elena reported. "I have a clear shot." "Negative." Chen's voice cut through the static. "We stick to the plan. Let them get inside first." Schmidt's men moved with practiced efficiency, sweeping the building's entrance before their leader approached. Jake counted 12 operatives, all armed with military-grade weapons. The old Nazi might be pushing 80, but his private army was anything but geriatric. "Jake, you're up," Elena said. "Remember, once you're inside, stay alive long enough for you to do your job." "I got it." Jake checked his pistol one final time, then looked down at Rex. "You ready for this, boy?" The dog's tail gave a single, determined wag. Jake sprinted across the open ground, using the storm's fury to mask his approach. The rear entrance Elena had scouted hung open, its lock destroyed by one of Chen's earlier reconnaissance teams. He slipped inside, Rex padding silently beside him. The mill's interior was a maze of catwalks and machinery, everything coated in decades of rust and neglect. Somewhere in this labyrinth, Schmidt was searching for the final piece of his father's legacy, the location of the remaining Nazi treasure caches hidden across the country. Jake had the information Schmidt wanted, burned into a small data drive now secured in his jacket pocket. Chen's people had spent weeks preparing the bait, creating false intelligence that would lead Schmidt to believe Jake possessed the complete treasure map. All they needed was to get close enough for Elena to make her move. Voices echoed from the main floor, speaking in rapid German. Jake climbed a service ladder to the upper level, positioning himself on a catwalk that overlooked the central assembly area. Below, Schmidt stood in a pool of harsh light cast by portable flood lamps, examining what appeared to be architectural drawings spread across a makeshift table. "Herr Sullivan," Schmidt called out suddenly, his voice carrying through the vast space. "I know you're here. Your government friends are not as subtle as they believe." Jake cursed silently. The old bastard was sharper than they'd anticipated. "You have something that belongs to me," Schmidt continued. "Something my father died protecting from your people's crude justice." "Your father was a war criminal," Jake shouted back, not bothering to hide his position anymore. "Whatever he hid should stay buried." Schmidt's laugh was cold as winter steel, naive. "Do you know what your precious government will do with those treasures once they claim them? The same thing we would have done, use them to fund their own vision of order." Rex growled low in his throat, sensing danger moments before the muzzle flash erupted from the shadows. Jake dove sideways as bullets sparked off the catwalk railing, the dog leaping with him toward better cover. Now would be good. Jake gasped into his radio as more gunfire erupted around them. Elena's rifle cracked once, twice. Jake heard someone scream below, then the sharp commands of Schmidt rallying his remaining men. The lights went out suddenly, plunging the mill into darkness broken only by lightning flashes through the broken windows. Jake fumbled for the detonator, knowing their careful plan was already falling apart. In the distance, sirens wailed as Morrison's teams closed in, but Jake knew they wouldn't arrive in time. Whatever happened next would be decided here, in the dark, between him and the ghosts of the past. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Berlin stood like a monument to forgotten secrets, its broken windows reflecting the grey dawn sky. Jake crouched behind a rusted shipping container, his German Shepherd Rex pressed against his side, both of them watching the building where Klaus Richter had taken Sarah. The past 72 hours had been a blur of international flights, desperate phone calls, and following digital breadcrumbs that led him here. The Nazi gold was secondary now. All that mattered was getting Sarah back alive. "Movement on the east side," whispered Agent Martinez through Jake's earpiece. The FBI had finally become allies rather than adversaries when they realized Richter's network stretched far beyond a simple treasure hunt. This was about funding a resurgence of something the world had hoped was buried forever. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Come alone. Bring the vault contents. You have 10 minutes." He looked down at the backpack beside him, heavy with gold coins and the documents that had started this nightmare. The real treasure wasn't the money. It was the detailed records of modern Nazi sympathizers, complete with bank accounts, meeting locations, and plans that made Jake's blood run cold. Rex whined softly, sensing the tension. The dog had saved Jake's life twice in the past week, first by detecting the explosive device in his truck, then by tracking Sarah's scent through Prague's winding streets before they'd lost the trail. "I'm going in," Jake said into his comm. "Negative," Martinez replied. "Wait for backup." But Jake was already moving, slipping between the shadows with Rex at his heel. Sarah had risked everything to help him decode the vault's secrets. Now it was his turn. The warehouse's main door hung open like a mouth waiting to swallow him. Inside, shafts of dusty light revealed a cavernous space filled with empty crates and machinery left over from East German manufacturing. Jake's footsteps echoed, despite his efforts at stealth. "Sullivan!" Richter's voice boomed from somewhere in the darkness above. "I was beginning to think you didn't care about Miss Chen." Jake stepped into the center of the space, backpack in hand. "Let her go, Klaus. You've got what you wanted." A spotlight blazed to life, blinding him momentarily. When his vision cleared, he saw Sarah tied to a chair on a metal platform 20 feet above, accessed by a narrow staircase. Richter stood beside her, a pistol pressed against her temple. "The contents of the vault, if you please," Richter called down. "Slide the bag across the floor and kick it toward the stairs." Jake hesitated. Once he gave up the documents, Richter would have no reason to keep either of them alive. But Sarah's frightened eyes met his, and he saw her mouth something, "Rex." Understanding flooded through him. He unzipped the backpack, pretending to check its contents, while actually unclipping Rex's leash. "It's all here," he called out. "Gold, documents, everything." As he slid the bag across the concrete floor, Rex suddenly bolted into the shadows. Richter's attention followed the dog for just a moment, but it was enough. Sarah threw herself sideways in the chair, sending both herself and Richter tumbling. Jake sprinted up the stairs 3 at a time as gunshots echoed through the warehouse. Richter had recovered quickly, but Rex had found another way up, a service ladder Jake hadn't seen. The German shepherd launched himself at Richter just as the man took aim at Jake. The impact sent Richter's shot wild, the bullet sparking off metal beams overhead. Jake tackled him while Rex kept the gun hand pinned, his jaws locked around Richter's wrist. "It's over," Jake panted, finally wrestling the weapon away. But Richter smiled, blood trickling from his mouth where he'd hit the platform. "You think this ends with me? We are everywhere, Sullivan. The vault was just the beginning." The sound of boots on metal announced the arrival of Martinez and her team. As they secured Richter, Jake untied Sarah's bonds with shaking hands. "Are you hurt?" he asked, checking her for injuries. She shook her head, then surprised him by pulling him into a fierce embrace. "I thought we were dead," she whispered. "The documents?" Martinez asked, retrieving the backpack. "Everything's there," Jake confirmed. "Names, locations, financial networks. Enough to shut down their operation for good." As they descended from the platform, Sarah leaning on Jake's arm, while Rex trotted proudly beside them, Jake felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. The nightmare that had begun with a simple real estate purchase in Oregon was finally over. Outside, the German sunrise painted the sky in shades of gold that reminded Jake of the treasure that had nearly cost them everything. But looking at Sarah's relieved smile and feeling Rex's warm presence against his leg, Jake realized he'd found something far more valuable than Nazi gold. He'd found people worth fighting for, and the courage to do what was right when everything was at stake.